All right, well, it's a few minutes after 6, so I guess maybe we'll get started and folks can trickle in if they're running late. So, hi everyone, and thanks for coming to Franklin County Stormwater's first webinar of 2025. We're really excited to have you all here and to have Dr. Kris Stepenuck of Lake Champlain Sea Grant to present on road salt best practices. So just a few notes before the webinar begins. We are recording, and this webinar will be posted on our website on our past events page, and I'll drop the link to that page in the chat momentarily. And as the presentation goes along, if you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll save them for the end for a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. And please remember to keep your mic muted throughout the presentation. And once we get to the Q&A, feel free to unmute to ask your questions. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Kris for her presentation. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Nora. All right, I will share. You see one slide at this point, I believe.
Yep, I can see the first slide.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm excited to talk about road salt with you all, and we'll be starting us off thinking about what is the challenge and why is it a challenge and what's the situation here in Vermont. And then we'll move into this title, which is best practices, and what is it that we can do to try to minimize the challenge that is happening. And Nora, I'm just going to ask a question. For me, my picture is in the middle of my slide. Is that true for you? Or do you not see that?
Sorry, you mean the
Like
photo
my,
on the background?
yeah, no, like I can see, I just minimized it. Like I could see my own face in the middle of my slide, but now
Oh,
I've set it
I
aside.
see
So,
it towards the top,
oh,
so
you,
it's
okay.
not in the way.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is how salt actually works to help us in the winter and why it is used the way that it's used. So this is a video that I have just grabbed pictures from the video from the American Chemical Society. So if we start in the top left, these little Mickey Mouse looking things are water molecules with a hydrogen in red and two oxygens. And in water, when it's warmer than freezing, so greater than 32 degrees Fahrenheit or greater than 0 degrees Celsius, water molecules are able to kind of free float around within liquid water. But when you get to this point of freezing at 32 Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius, what happens is these water molecules will actually try to uh, connect together, and they form these bonds with one another, like that creates what we know as ice. And the way that salt works to help prevent the formation of ice from our water molecules when we get to the freezing temperature is salt, and I'll say salt being normally it's sodium chloride, so Na, the purple dots, and Cl chloride, the green dots. When salt enters liquid water, sorry about that, it breaks apart into the ions separately, sodium and chloride. And what those ions do down here in the lower left is they get in between the water molecules that are trying to find one another to form ice, and they actually prevent the formation of those bonds. They prevent the ability of the water molecules to connect to one another to form ice. I in some examples, what I say is it's kind of like the sodium and the chloride are like referees in an ice hockey game getting in between the hockey players where they don't want them to fight. So in this case, we're saying, okay, we don't want our water molecules to bond with one another. And the essential process is that adding salt to water actually lowers the freezing point of water, thereby preventing the ice from forming. So it's cool what it does chemically. And it also has some challenges. So the history of using salt as a preventative or a way to reduce the freezing point of water on our roads actually goes back to the early 1940s in the state of New Hampshire. The highways were using this, where there would be a couple of guys in the back of a truck. They would have this funnel type device at the back of the truck, and they would actually pour the salt into that funnel and it would land out on the road. After each mile, the driver of the truck would honk so they could kind of calibrate about how much salt they were putting out per mile. So you can see a couple different images here from Caleb Dobbins with New Hampshire DOT. That year, in the early 1940s, there was about 5,000 tons of salt used on all US roadways. Again, it started just in New Hampshire. That was by 1941. By 1975, there was about 8 million metric tons of salt used, and a metric ton is 2,200 pounds instead of 2,000 pounds. So we had already gone up from 5,000 tons total to 8 million metric tons. And then we've only seen an increase over time from 1975 up to 2015. Now we're seeing somewhere in the order of 23 to 25 million metric tons of salt used per year on all US roadways. We did a calculation based on the kind of the like how many roads are we building in the US over time. And between 1975 and 2003, we calculated that the road surfaces in the US increased by 6%, but salt use on those road surfaces increased by 43%. So it's a lot of salt that is in use going down on our roads. I did a calculation because I wanted to know, well, what is 20 million metric tons of salt? Like how much is that? And so I calculated, if you think of the big plow trucks that are the cities are using or the state is using, and you fill each of those with salt, the amount of salt that they can hold to get to 20 million metric tons would create a traffic jam of salt trucks from Burlington all the way to Seattle, all the way back to Burlington, and all the way back out to Glacier National Park. Each year, that is the amount of salt that we are putting on our roads in the United States. So it's a lot. We also know that it's not only on our roads where we are putting salt, and there's estimates that between 15 and 40% of all the salt that is spread is actually spread on parking lots, on sidewalks, and entryways outside of buildings, and on our driveways. And so it's not just the municipalities or the states that are the challenge, it's also private contractors and individuals who are spreading salt or ordering or working with contractors to have salt spread at a business or something like that. So there's a lot of impacts of excess salt to the environment and to other areas as well. And I'll talk through a couple of those. So one of the things that can happen is that salt can run off of these surfaces, sidewalk here in South Burlington, I took a picture of on the right. And the salt can actually go into waterways, whether that be a pond or a wetland or a stream or Lake Champlain. That salt can move into those water bodies and it can affect the ability of aquatic life to survive. So it can actually kill fish or other aquatic insects, the food chain of the fish. It can kill the fish by becoming literally toxic to them as it runs off the roads. Once the salt is in a lake, it actually can affect the natural lake cycles and also available habitat for aquatic life. So this is a depiction of, say, Mallett's Bay in Lake Champlain. We've got Camel's Hump here in the back. We've got ice in the winter. And what happens normally after the ice melts in spring, we know two things. One is, first of all, ice floats, right? Ice is actually less dense than water. So this is in degrees Celsius. 4 degrees Celsius is about 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So we know that water at the bottom of the lake in the winter is the heaviest. And it's 39 degrees here. Ice is floating. In the spring, when the ice melts, we have the same temperature top and bottom. And what happens when spring winds come in, it breaks up the ice, and the water here that was ice now becomes 4 degrees Celsius, and it actually sinks to the bottom, and it does something called turnover. So the lake should actually mix. The water from the top sinks to the bottom, and then the water at the bottom gets disturbed and can mix. And we know the same thing can happen in the fall, or sorry, I mean, go to summer. So spring turnover happens. And then in the summertime, we actually heat up the surface water from the air and the sun and the warm weather that's there. And we create, if you've ever been swimming and your toes get cold, you know that the surface water tends to be warmer and then it gets colder as you go down. In the fall, when the winds come in the fall and the surface temperatures start to get colder again, there's actually a second turnover when the water is the most dense. It will sink to the bottom and then turn over, and it releases nutrients and it changes kind of the chemistry within the lake top to bottom. And with salting, this process can get impacted in the ways it shouldn't be. So this is some slides from Brendan Wiltsey, who was at the time with the Osoba River Association. He's now with the Lake George Association. So this is a depiction of Mirror Lake, which is actually the lake that is in Lake Placid in New York. So in the winter, we've got a salt shaker. We salt the streets in Lake Placid. That salt gets into the lake and it sinks to the bottom, and it creates an area at the bottom of the lake that's actually high chloride, so sodium chloride, and low oxygen. And so the fish have to be up a little bit above that bottom part of the lake because there's not enough oxygen for them to survive in the bottom of the lake. In the spring in Mirror Lake, we know from Brendan's work and others' work that that mixing process that I just showed you is actually not happening because there's a salt wedge in the bottom of the lake that stops the mixing from happening top to bottom in the lake. And so this bottom water stays low in oxygen and the fish have to stay up above it. It's not necessarily a problem in the spring because there's plenty of lake water for them to be in. But when it gets to be warmer in the summer and warm water starts to heat up at the surface, warm water can hold less oxygen than cold water, just by natural ways of liquid, warm liquid being able to hold less gas than a cold liquid. And so the fish start to get squeezed because the oxygen is still low at the bottom, and now it's getting less oxygen at the top. As summer continues, the fish start to get squeezed further and further because there's less oxygen at the top and we still don't have the oxygen at the bottom. And this is truly happening in Mirror Lake now as a result of salting in that community. We also know that Lake Champlain is getting saltier. So this is a picture on the right of overview of Lake Champlain, and each of the rectangles represents a tributary stream that flows into Lake Champlain. And the plot here is showing chloride on the vertical axis, and then it shows time on the horizontal axis. And what I want you to look at for each of the rectangles is kind of this right hand, maybe third from 2010 to 2020. And you will see that all of the graphs pretty much are going upward from 2010 to 2020. And that is showing that we are seeing an increase in chloride in all of the tributaries to Lake Champlain, or the major tributaries to Lake Champlain in this 10-year time period. And we know, in addition to the tributary streams getting saltier and carrying that chloride into Lake Champlain, that the lake itself is also increasing in chloride. And so this is a plot, again, we've got chloride from our road salts 1990 up to 2020. There was measurements, this is from the basin program. There was some shallow monitoring and there was some deep lake monitoring, but we generally see an increase in chloride from 1990 to 2005, and then not really clear what happened, but there was a decrease for maybe 5 or so years, and then starting around 2010, again up to 2020, we're seeing just an increase of chloride happening in the lake. One of the things that happens by the Federal Clean Water Act is that we are required, states are required to monitor all of their waters for all kinds of pollutants. And we know that there are 6 streams in Vermont that are polluted by chloride. All of those happen to be in Chittenden County, here where Burlington is, and it is related to road salt. We also know separately that road salt can impact vegetation. So you see here the plants, sidewalk is salted in the winter and the plants are impacted come summer with being killed from the salt. We also know that salt can impact infrastructure. So that could be bridges, it could be stairs. These are pictures from the University of Vermont campus where the stairs are being corroded, doorways, rusting away of doors and door frames. Campus has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars replacing doors, carpets, entryways. Over here on the right, we see these stalactites of salt. This is in the Davis Center Circle. This is a vault for a heating system for the campus. And the salt is literally dripping through from the Davis Circle down into here and corroding various metal surfaces, stairs and whatnot. And so it's making the expected life cycle of some of these structures about half of what was expected and costing campus millions of dollars. And it's not just campus that's facing this. So we also know it can impact groundwater and soils. If people are having drinking water, that's a groundwater source in the Adirondacks. We have seen this happen where people's groundwater and their drinking water wells are contaminated. It's also true in other locations in Vermont and New Hampshire. And in soils, if salt gets into soils, it can change the soil microbes. It can make the soils have less ability to hold water, and can change kind of the cycling within the soils. So there's a lot of different impacts in that way as well. So the question is, how much chloride is too much chloride? So there's the Federal Clean Water Act. Again, this is the act that requires Vermont and all the other states and federally recognized tribes to monitor their waters. There's a guideline, a water quality standard that the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has, but the state of Vermont has adopted that same standard. And so we know when chloride levels reach what is its units are milligrams per liter. When it's 860 milligrams per liter measured with a measuring device, we know that that is immediately life-threatening to aquatic life. It can kill fish, for instance, or again, the insects that the fish are eating. We also know that there's a standard, a chronic standard, and that's 230 milligrams per liter. And if the levels of chloride get to be that level in a stream or in a lake, that's a long-term impact. So it could be, for instance, impacting the ability of fish to reproduce because their eggs can't take the salty conditions that are being caused by the chloride to be there. So when a state or a tribe monitors and sees and observes these conditions over time, they are required by the Federal Clean Water Act to write what's called a TMDL, or a total maximum daily load, or basically a pollution diet for whatever pollutant it is that is being impacting that waterway. So the first total maximum daily load, or TMDL, in Vermont for chloride was written last year for Sunnyside Brook in Colchester. And that is going to be driving actions on the ground of what we can do to minimize more chloride from getting into that water body. And you can expect to see others being written as well. So one of the things we know, unfortunately, is that those water quality standards of 230 milligrams per liter or 860 milligrams per liter, they're already set too high to protect these are microscopic organisms that live in the lake. For instance, this one would be a water flea. So they're the base of our food chain for fish. And we already know from other research studies that these organisms are being impacted and their life cycles are impacted already when you get to these water quality standards that have been set by the EPA or by the states. So it's a challenge because we know that it's affecting the food webs within our water bodies when we have very low levels of chloride entering our water bodies. So these are the six streams that are impacted by chloride. So we've got Muddy Brook, Centennial Brook this is the picture here is Centennial Brook. That's draining right off of the University of Vermont campus. Sunnyside Brook, I just mentioned in Colchester. Inglesby Brook is draining from the UVM athletic campus, and it goes down kind of by Flynn Ave and into Lake Champlain by Oak Ledge Park. Potash Brook comes through South Burlington and then down into Burlington, sort of over by the new Hannafords and the new road that's being built out by I-189. And then Upper Potash Brook is draining into Potash Brook in South Burlington. So these are the 6 that are known right now to have high levels of chloride. So one of the big things in the Lake Champlain watershed, which is shown here, we got Burlington here, we got Plattsburgh up here on the left. We know that the land area that drains to Lake Champlain is very large in comparison to the lake itself. It's about 19 times the size of the lake itself. And so in this watershed, if you compare that, say, to the Great Lakes, their land to water ratio is more like 2 to 1 or 1.5 to 1. So what we do in this watershed, this land area that drains to Lake Champlain, really impacts the water quality. And we will see that, like I mentioned, Lake Placid, where Mirror Lake is. So there's impacts of salt there. And we've got Chittenden County and then other urban areas where there's ski areas or where there's urban uses. We do see higher chloride levels. They may change over the course of the year, but we need to think about this not only in Burlington, not only in Chittenden County, but in our urban areas and places where we're salting in the winter. So that brings me to the best practices. Like, what is it that we can actually do to reduce salt and, again, keep people safe? One of the reasons I like working on the salt topic is that we can actually use less salt than we do on the land, still keep people safe, still reduce the freezing point of water, and protect the environment, protect infrastructure, and actually it's cheaper if you use less salt. So I have 2 kind of levels of best practices that I'm going to share in today's presentation. One of those sets is for homeowners or renters, kind of the individual person. And then I also wanted to share with you what municipalities are doing, because they are taking action to try to reduce their salt use as well. So, but I'll start with the individuals. So I have a video that we put together for custodians at the University of Vermont that I wanted to share, because we as individuals can follow the same practices that our custodians are going to be following or at the University of Vermont. So let's see if we can get this to work.
Yeah, my name is Mike White. I've been working here for 9 years now. January is going to be 10 years. It's 9 good years. Yeah, complaints so far. They can't do ice. To don't remove ice to prevent ice. Best to put within 15 feet of the door. Entry cannot be used in a rainstorm or a wet snowstorm. It can be put down during a snowstorm when we are there removing the snow. Entry won't damage doors and carpet. We have a lot of stairs. The stairs some of the most difficult part in the winter, and that's why the anti-icer will be ideal to use on the stairs. Salt, it's not good for our lake, it's not good for our streams or our river, it's not good for the fish. Doesn't mean it's just proper cleaning and less salt. Definitely doing that. So we can do better. Meaning the snow plowing guy, the guy who uses the shovel, the guy who uses the snow blower. If we come as a team and really work as a team, then all we need to do really and truly is just clean the snow properly before we put salt down. But when you put the salt in the snow, we just get very slush, and then overnight. Then you have to come back in the morning and dump more salt just to move that ice again. So you just like over and over. I want to spread it as much as I can spread, because you just dump it one place, then that don't work. It's easier when you move the snow and put the salt down. Yeah.
All right, so let me get out of this. So Mike White was sharing some key tips. So one of the first things that he said that I wanted to flag, he talks about this product called Entry that the custodians are using. It's an acetate-based product that's not chloride-based. So that is one option, is to use a different kind of material than a chloride-based product to minimize the amount of chloride that's reaching Lake Champlain. The other things that he talks about are these. First of all, he talks about shoveling or moving away the ice first, scraping the ice away first. The reason for that is you can use less salt if you don't make the salt have to work its way through the snow or through the ice, and to just have access to the surface directly. With the Entry product, you can also use a chloride-based product that would just be a salt and water mixture. You have to be specific. It's a 23.3% solution of salt and water. If you use that ahead of the storm, like Mike was explaining, you can actually help to prevent the bond from forming between the ice and the pavement. And that will help you to be able to shovel or scrape away the ice first before putting salt down, to prevent or to reduce the freezing point of the water. The second thing that Mike talked about that we try to advertise to people is to spread your salt grains more wide than a pile of salt. And a guidance is about 3 inches apart or 8 centimeters apart. And the reason for that is that the salt grains they can work to reduce the freezing point of water over a kind of a larger area. And you don't need many, many grains of salt in a pile to do that same work. So you can save yourself money by using less salt in the same size area. One of the things that we tell the custodians is you can do about 2 parking spaces with about a cup of salt, or 10 sidewalk squares with about a cup of salt. And the third thing we say is to sweep up extra salt. So say you have something like this happens, you accidentally put down too much salt, you don't have to leave it there at all. You could sweep that up and spread it wider, or you could leave it there for that immediate storm and then pick it up before the snow melts and it runs off and it ends up in a storm drain or in a local wetland or a local stream. So you can reuse salt. You can have a bucket you can keep in your garage or on your covered porch, and keep a dustpan and brush and just sweep up the salt and use it again later rather than leaving it there to run off as the snow melts. Some of the other tips that we can think about, and this can happen, this picture happens to be from the University of Wisconsin campus, but we could do it in our own properties as well, is thinking about reducing the area that you maintain in the winter so that you don't have to salt as much. Is there some place that you don't have to shovel or you don't have to salt because you don't go there very much, or you could avoid going there in the winter time? Or can you pick one sidewalk instead of 2 that leads to your door and just salt that one instead of salting two avenues or pathways to get to the same door? So reducing the area is a good choice in addition to these other 3 tips. You can also consider where you put your snow pile, and I think this is easier done if you are using a snow blower rather than shoveling. But for instance, if you can position where you would put your snow pile where when the snow actually melts, it's not going to create an icy patch across your driveway or across your sidewalk, because it's on the downhill side, for instance, and it's going to just melt and go off into a storm drain and won't need to have you salting an area that's going to end up with liquid that will freeze when it gets cold at night. So if you're thinking about how you position the snow piles in your own properties can help you reduce the amount of salt that you need to use to prevent ice formation. This is what I was talking about with the Entry product and the 23.3% brine. And the reason I have a picture of an egg here is the reason that you would put down your 23.3% salt and water mixture ahead of a storm is like putting oil in your frying pan. The reason you do that is so that your egg doesn't stick to the pan. Same exact thing with a saltwater mixture. If you put that down on your sidewalk ahead of a storm before the snow comes, when you um, when you go to shovel later, it's going to scrape off more easily because you haven't allowed the bond to form between the ice or the snow and that surface. So again, we can do that in our own properties. 23.3% is the solution that we're looking for. Otherwise, it can get slippery if you don't have that solution quite right. You can also, if you work with a private contractor to have your driveway plowed or to have your sidewalks shoveled, you can actually create a management plan with them. You can let them know, hey, I don't want you to salt if, for instance, you know it's going to be warm the next day after a certain storm. Maybe it's March and you know, well, the next day it's going to be 40. You don't need to have salt put down when it's going to be warm. And the more you can communicate with your contractor about your interest in having reduced amounts of salt used, the more they can feel comfortable doing that because they don't necessarily have to worry about being sued. In New Hampshire, there's a thing called a Green Snow program where private contractors who are trained and keep good records, specific ways of keeping records about the salt that they're putting down, are actually eligible for reduced liability in the event of a slip and fall. And that program has been demonstrated to help prevent lawsuits. There's some legislation that's been introduced here in Vermont. And I actually am guilty of not knowing what's going on with it right now. I know that there was some testifying to the legislature last week. But the idea is that there could be a similar program in Vermont if the legislature were to choose to pass that. But you yourselves can talk with your contractors and let them know your interest in having reduced amounts of salt used. The other thing that can happen that's a good idea is to make sure that any salt you use is covered. Sometimes you'll see neighborhoods where they have a salt bucket out or something like that. And if you make sure that's covered, then that doesn't get subject to getting rained on and getting leached out and sent off into a local waterway. At the municipal level, they can do that with their larger salt piles as well as making sure those are in covered structures. Another tip, and this is one that I guess I already said and I forgot that I had it, is making sure that you remove the snow before you apply the salt, and then get out there and keep moving the snow away. So in a commercial situation, like at a business or the custodians on campus, we say, hey, always make sure that you're shoveling the snow first. Don't just throw salt down to kind of make your job easier and kind of buy you time. In the case of being a homeowner, if we make sure that we shovel first, then again, salt doesn't have to work its way through the snow, and we can use less that way. The other options are to use different kinds of products entirely. Like, don't even think about salt or a product that makes traction, you're throwing down kitty litter or something like that. On the left is ice bug shoes. They actually have little studded studs in their shoes so that you have traction on your feet. I use nano spikes when I'm walking my dog through the neighborhood. And those are kind of take off, put on kind of micro spikes on my own shoes to help me not have to worry about needing salt on a surface because I'm expecting it to be slippery and I have some kind of traction on my feet to help me not slide. Another option is electric mats. Heat Track is a brand that sells these kinds of mats that it does use energy, but if you happen to have solar, it could be a way to use your excess solar from the summer to melt the snow on your stairs or on a pathway, a sidewalk, something like that. And then I mentioned I wanted to share kind of what some of the things that are happening at the University of Vermont and also in some of our municipalities and the best practices that they're using. So at this level, I'll say the commercial level, one of the things you might see on campus once in a while is these stripes on the sidewalk. And this is them using the process of the saltwater mixture or brine ahead of a storm to prevent the bond from forming. And again, it helps them scrape up the snow that does fall better when it comes down so that they can use less salt after the storm hits. I'm going to share with you a second video, and this one is from the community of Hyde Park, and it talks about the practices that they're using to reduce salt.
Is traditional foundation making you look worse? Traditional foundations are not great for lines in the face.
Hyde Park is made up of a 5-man crew. We have 64 miles and 21 miles, which are blacktop, that we maintain. To reduce our salt use, we've added the air temperature sensor, the computer salter, and the salt brine. So in 2016, we invested in a computer salter for our salt truck, which we calibrate our trucks every fall, so we know exactly how many pounds per mile we're putting out. These will slow down with the truck, it'll speed up with the truck, so I'm always putting out whatever pounds per mile I'm looking to apply for whatever storm we're dealing with.
Hey, Kris, I'm not sure if you could turn the captions on. It's a little bit hard to understand.
Oh,
The ground temperature, the air temperature.
I am not sure.
Is like a black ice event, if I can see
let's
it
see.
on.
I can see them over on the right if you hover over the video.
Oh, like here. Yes.
Salting, trying to treat the.
Better?
For black ice.
Yeah.
but
Thanks.
Yep.
Save a lot of money by that because we may only put out, say, 3 yards of salt for our whole route compared to a 7 yards or, so that's been a very good payback for us for our salt. In 2019, I bought a used salt brine machine. In 2023, we showed that we saved enough, or my select board was on board of purchasing a new machine, which I think we purchased for $40,000. I think we invested in that one.
We've cut our salt use almost in half. So this is our salt brine maker. We got a big tub here that has water and salt that agitates. The water just mixes around until it gets to a 23.3. When it gets to the 23.3%, it pumps out. When it needs more water, it adds more water all by itself. And when it gets low on salt, we add more salt to the bucket. Then during the storm, we go out and we fill up the trucks to spread it onto the salt.
We spray at our spinner, so our salt is just think of sand on a beach. If you couldn't make a sandcastle if it was dry, it would just blow around. The same thing what we're doing is we're making it wet, so it actually just drops and stays there, doesn't blow off the first car that comes by. So for us, we've been very happy with that. All our salt stays in our roads. We've reduced our salt budget. Taxpayers have been happy, our select board's been happy, and we've been happy.
Some of the other benefits is the benefits on the environment and waterways. You know, you're not polluting all the streams, you're not polluting Lake Champlain. We're spreading all that salt. All that salt people spread, it goes into the streams or the stormwater. So the less salt that we spread is better impact on the environment.
We've received 0 complaints since we started salt brine, which is amazing, but we're very happy with it working out for us. We've been very pleased with it. One of the best things we've done for our winter maintenance.
Right. No, sorry. I gotta get past it.
Hyde Park is made up of a 5-man crew. We have 64 miles.
Try this. All right. So just a couple other things. So sorry, the sound was not super great on that. Hyde Park, again, they're measuring pavement temperature, they're calibrating their trucks, they are wetting the salt before they put it onto the pavement, which means it sticks better, which means they can use less. And they know the pavement temperature, so they can decide, again, the example I used earlier, like, hey, today's going to be sunny and warm. I know the pavement's not freezing right now. It's only going to get warmer. I don't need to put salt down. and they've been able to save about 40% of their salt by doing those 3 or 4 different things. In the city of South Burlington, they actually also have a secondary plow. You could have it back here, sort of halfway back on the truck. They also have one where it's kind of like right behind the front plow. They feel like they call it their salt saver. To be able to scrape the surface really clean has given them the ability to reduce their salt use by a significant amount as well. The other thing that South Burlington and a number of other communities have, they call them live edge plows or segmented plows. So these pieces of the plow move as individual teeth, if you will. And if a road surface is not perfect, they can scrape the road cleaner. This has also helped the communities be able to save a lot of salt. It's also nice because they can replace just a piece of the plow if needed. It's easier on the people's backs, and it's cheaper to replace, and it cleans the surface better. So they've been a win-win-win for the communities. Pre-wetting salt. So Mark and Ryan from Hyde Park talked about that in the video. Again, this is wetting the salt just before it's put down on the surface, so it sticks better to the roadway and it doesn't bounce off and end up in vegetation or where it's not supposed to be doing the work that we want it to be doing on the surface. And measuring pavement temperatures, that was highlighted in that video. Also providing training to staff as people are retiring, as new people are being brought on board, helping the new drivers of plows being able to understand kind of the art of knowing when to salt or knowing not when to salt is really helping them be able to save salt by educating the people who are the artists working in our communities to keep us safe. And the last thing I wanted to share is I have created a pledge for people to sign on to say that they're willing to do some things to help reduce the amount of salt that is used. And it covers a lot of the best practices that I talked about today, saying I'm going to minimize the area that I salt, or I'm going to reduce the amount of salt that I spread because I'm going to try to keep this 3-inch distance. I might wear shoes that have traction. I might use some other kind of a product. I might put winter tires on my car so that I am more likely able to have good traction when I'm driving. And maybe I'm going to talk and share my knowledge with somebody else about the impacts that salt can have on the environment or on infrastructure, and the things that we can do as individuals to help reduce the salt so that we can protect it. Because, and this is something I didn't say, is once salt is in our water bodies, it is tricky to get out. It's not going anywhere except for it's accumulating over time. And so it will cost us money later to not take action today to prevent the salt from getting into our groundwater or our lake water or stream water. It's costing us, future us, for doing and making poor decisions today or making good decisions today. We can benefit. So I will stop there. We got about 15 minutes or so for questions. And I see the chat. Oh, and I got that. So yeah.
It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat so far, but if anyone has any questions that they want to have answered, feel free to put them in the chat and I can read them, or raise your hand and unmute, whichever works for you. But maybe as we're waiting, if anyone has any questions, I was wondering if you might be able to tell us more about Sunnyside Brook in Colchester with the state's first TMDL for salt. I'm curious if there are any other tributaries like Champlain being considered for something like that, and what that designation has meant for the town's management practices.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it hasn't, I don't think a lot has happened yet. It just got approved and got written, but it will serve as a model for the other communities and other streams that are listed as impaired. And I know I'm speculating because I haven't talked to the community about it yet, but I know that like leading into when it was being developed, kind of in general, not Colchester specifically, but in general, municipalities were really challenged by this because of the fact that private contractors also play a role, but they aren't implicated in kind of having to make changes, and the municipalities in the state are implicated because of the way the law is written. So I think that there's probably some angst about how do we really make change when the entities that are required to make change are not the only ones who are causing impact. And so I think that's where we see this legislation coming in and seeing if we can create a way for private contractors through limited liability to use less salt because it saves them from something that we know is a big challenge for them. Then that can give them motivation to also get into the game of reducing the amount of salt that's used, and not just the municipalities who are regulated.
Thanks for that answer. We have one question from Alex in the chat asking if you can recommend specific products as alternatives to using salt.
Yeah, so one is acetate. It does cost more. So potassium acetate is one product that is a non-chloride based de-icer. It just costs more. The one product that was in that video is called Entry, and the campus buys it commercially, but I think it is also a product that could be available to individuals. I've never used it myself, so I'm not gonna say that it's super great, but it is a non-chloride based product. So that is one. You can also use things for traction, but do be aware. So like for instance, kitty litter, if you wanted to use something for traction, but be aware that generally any other products other than acetate based products are going to have their own impacts. So I used to live in Wisconsin. They would use cheese waste as on the city streets, or you can use molasses, or you can use sugar. All of those things, if they run off into a water body, are going to make a little party for the microorganisms. And there's going to be lots of microorganisms trying to eat them up because they're delicious and sugary. And on a road, it's going to do a similar thing as the sodium chloride. It's going to kind of get in between the water molecules and not allow them to form a ice cube or an ice period. But in the streams, it's going to create an oxygen deficit when that sugar gets into the water bodies. So there are issues there if you're using those kinds of products. Or sand is also not super great because it's going to cause filling in of pore spaces. So there's everything else is kind of a challenge, which is why your alternatives could be like wear traction on your shoes, or have an electric mat, or do something, cover a surface, or salt in a smaller area. That's why I offer non-product based solutions, because of the challenges that any kind of product that can run off into the water body can cause.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess it relates to, and maybe you've already answered this a little bit, but Bridget had a question saying that they've heard from a constituent recently who wanted to know, in terms of road maintenance, which is better, sanding or salting, since both can be washed off water and enter waterways, wondering if both are equally problematic for water quality.
Yeah, I mean, equally in their own unique ways, they both are challenging, right? Sand and sediment getting into water bodies is no good either, and chloride is no good either. Yeah, so they both have their problems. The other thing that I only recently learned about, maybe a couple of years ago, is so there's not salting on dirt roads, and so in Vermont we have maybe 30% dirt roads, in some communities higher amounts. So there generally is not salting on dirt roads because it freezes up and it clogs things. But in the summertime, dirt roads often have calcium chloride spread to reduce dust. And so for dust suppressant. So sometimes our dirt roads in the summer are actually having chloride contributions to our streams for dust suppressant actions, and then they wouldn't have salt in the winter. They would just be sanded in the winter because that forms traction. So yeah, Bridget, yes, they both have their own problems is the short answer of that.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about dirt roads in Vermont.
Oh, the calcium chloride. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of them. I was surprised by that moving here.
Yeah.
We have another question from Claire asking, saying a lot of the methods for homeowners and renters seem very easily accessible, but this is the first time I've heard about them. What steps could the state take to raise awareness about more affordable and effective methods of salt application?
Good question. So one of the things I guess the state could do, or any of our kind of watershed organizations, is have education campaign and try to get the word out to people like, hey, these are options of things that we can do that aren't that hard, that uh, could help us reduce our salt use, and trying to promote the adoption of these practices by all of us, by each of us. I know a couple of years ago, people might have heard about the state Department of Transportation actually had a contest to name all the plows. And I don't know if you know that there's an app you can actually look out and you can see when which plow has last made its last pass of a certain road wherever it is, and you can see they have all the names. I think part of the reason for naming them was that you can then be like, oh, Salty McSaltface just went by, 20 minutes ago on Heinsberg Road. And so it could be something like that where we could come up with an education campaign that crosses social media and tries to reach us through our YouTube or our where are we looking as individuals, and maybe we can try to educate people, at the gas pump on those little videos that are showing us whatever they show us when we're pumping gas, or as we're scrolling through our social media, if we can pop up with a video. I know Rethink Runoff, some people may have seen. I know my social media is coming up with some tips from the Rethink Runoff group recently as well. So I do think education campaign in the ways that people are getting their information would be helpful. A couple of weeks ago, it was Winter Salt Week, and I actually was talked with the Burlington Beer Company. I was going to hang out there for the evening and just talk to people who came in about salt while they were enjoying their evening out or their restaurant. So I feel like there's a lot of places where people are going that we could get advertising to, whether that be in the form of somebody tabling or a rack card or a sticker. I actually have stickers if people want them. Happy to try to get some to Nora and I can get them out. Uh, um, hold on, I'm gonna show you. Oh no, I'm not. Anyway, I have stickers like a shovel, scatter, sweep that I had in one of my slides. If you want those, happy to get some to Nora to get to folks. Or I have stickers that are don't salt if the pavement is less than 15 degrees Fahrenheit, because the salt doesn't work. I didn't talk about this, but that is also a true thing. So anyway, education, I think, is my very, very short answer of that to answer that question.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Kris. We've got one more question from Dean asking, given the salt impacts at UVM, has the administration ever considered issuing every incoming student a pair of yak tracks?
I
Should
love
they?
it. Love it. Um, we've actually had conversations with the physical plant about people wearing the right shoes. And not that I don't know if we've seriously got there, but there's definitely support from the physical plant staff who are doing the salting to try to get people at least sensible shoes, if not yak tracks. Tina, love it.
And Dean would like to clarify that he does not own stock in yak tracks.
So some of the videos I showed, I just put our website up here too. The way that we have the website set up is there's tips for individuals, there's tips for community leaders, for businesses and custodial staff, for municipalities and for private contractors. And we've got a bunch of different videos and tips. And I think I also put the link to the the pledge on that website somewhere, but I also have it in my slides, then I can drop it in the chat too. If people do want to make the pledge.
Awesome.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the sensitive area of Maquam Shore Bay, I had inquired about what was the best practice to salt or to sand and gravel. Our bay is getting very filled in and has very poor water quality. Who could best advise? I know, and I realize that you recently said that's a good question to salt or to sand, but are there more studies that would help determine what is the best practice in a cover story area like ours where the problem is ever present?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easy answer to that is to just try to reduce either of those material, the use of either of the materials, and whether that is through measuring pavement temperatures and knowing, okay, I don't need to even add any on this run, which I know that's how Hyde Park has saved a lot of theirs, is they just simply don't need as much because they are able to make determinations with the tools that they have. Or I think you're going to find most communities are tending to use salt more because, except if they have the dirt roads, that's the only reason that they would use sand, because of the impacts that we know that sand causes, the cleanup and the running off into waterways and impacting fish. I feel like that maybe came before the understanding of the impacts that salt is having, and so I think it's more of an adopted practice by most communities already, and so that I think the conversation that we're having is more about salt these days simply because it's more in use.
So in my small community here, they've never used salt. It's always grit and gravel and sand,
Okay.
but it's also in this area where water quality is terrible, and the bay is just gradually filling in and becoming more shallow. So that's why I raised the question.
It's a good one, right? For those reasons. Yeah.
Would less grit
Yeah.
and a very judicious use of salt be a better practice?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and just as an aside, of course, the road surface, along with being filthy, never dries out, and the driving conditions oftentimes are bordering on treacherous. So.
yeah, so you raised an interesting point. One of the things, I worked on a project in the Adirondacks to try to make recommendations for what can happen there. And what you're describing actually reminds me a little bit of that. Is one of the things that people wanted to recommend in the Adirondacks is that there would actually be some tree cutting to give more sunlight access to roadways so that there could be the sun would do some of the work of not like letting the pavement temperature be warmer or letting the snow melt maybe more quickly. And it sounds like there could be maybe solutions like that in your community that could also be ones that could be considered if for instance it's very shaded and it doesn't dry out, that maybe cutting back trees and giving a little bit more space could be an alternative that's not a salt-based or a sand-based solution, but that could still help the situation, or I don't know what the pavement temp or surface is like, but if there's potholes, if there could be community support for new pavement that is smoother, that's easier to scrape clean, maybe that's an option where there could be less sand or salt put down at all because the surface could be cleaned more easily. I don't know I don't know the specific space, but I wonder if there aren't kind of different sorts of solutions like that that could be considered that could still help and not be a product.
You raised some very, very interesting considerations. The pavement surface is near perfect. There's not a pothole to be found, and I joined the webinar tonight, having recently seen notice from Friends of Northern Lake Champlain that just 5 houses down from my home, a project will soon be in place to provide a trap for pollutants going to the lake,
Yep.
and that's all great, but again, we're not in a shaded area, but our community has definitely made the decision to not put any salt on the road, which I can understand on one hand is commendable, but on the other hand, it's also in an area where the bay is getting shallower, more shallow,
Yeah.
better say, each
Yeah.
year, and driving conditions are not ideal. And then you cross the town line, and the town of Saint Albans is apparently salting their roads because it's dry and so forth. So I guess I'm curious if and when the state or someone will better advise communities not only about the judicious use of salt, but also the impact of other deterrents for slippery conditions in the winter.
Right.
Could I just interrupt for a minute? I've really enjoyed your presentation tonight. You explained things extremely understandably and well. So
Thank
me
you.
not being schooled in any of this, I've just enjoyed and appreciate the program tonight.
Great. Thank you. Super glad to be here.
Thanks, Roger. Looks like we have one more question from Kent asking, a major motivation to overuse salt is to avoid slip and fall lawsuits. Do you know how the New Hampshire liability protection works for their certified applicators? I think he's asking about the Green Snow Pro. I'm just going to drop the link to that in the chat.
Yeah. So basically what they have to do, they have to attend a training. They have to keep records of the salting that they're doing, and they have to turn those into the state. And then by doing all those things, it gives them limited liability protection. And I know that that has worked to basically have lawsuits dropped because they did the things they were supposed to do. They were trained, they kept the records. I also know from talking with the folks at the state of New Hampshire that it's a very big process for them just to keep up with the paperwork and to kind of track all of the people who are getting trained and all of the record keeping that they're doing. And so it's a little bit of a paperwork nightmare for the state. And because they're spending so much of their time kind of following paperwork, they aren't necessarily sure how much salt is being saved because they haven't had time to be able to assess if there's actually salt reduction as a result of what should drive salt reduction. But when I talked to them, it was a couple of years ago now, they were kind of frustrated with, they're like, well, we like to think that it's helping us with salt reduction, but we don't actually know that because we're spending all our time kind of tracking people being trained and record keeping and whatnot. But it has definitely helped stop lawsuits. So I think that is a good thing. In my conversations with mostly businesses and asking about their decision-making process for putting salt down, liability is the number one thing that they're telling us that is driving salt use at business locations. And so that being the private contractors, I think is super important, that what could be done to help minimize liability risk, I think is a really important driving factor for our businesses.
Thanks, Ken, for that question. I think looks like we're a little over time, and if we don't have any other questions, I'm just gonna send a link to a survey that I would really appreciate if everyone could fill out to evaluate how this webinar was for you. And I want to thank Kris again for giving this really informative and engaging presentation. The recording will be on our website, and we have another 2 webinars lined up for this year. So keep an eye out for those. So thanks, Kris.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me. It was great to be able to share. I appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. See you.